a Sunday evening. I have with me an extremely special guest this time, and I don't want to introduce them quite yet because I want to provide a little bit of context. So if you bear with me, then I'll make the proper introduction that they are so duly deserved. So what I always like to do is start off with talking a little about the Kickstarter. We just have 2 days left on the Kickstarter, and let's go and see what's going on here. Let's go and see what's going on the Kickstarter. Give me 1 second. All righty, so here we are on the Kickstarter, ladies and gentlemen, $93,000. Now I gotta tell you, like, my personal goal is to get to 120. That's 4 times our pledge. That would be absolutely amazing. So we've got a little bit of room to go. We have about 42 hours to do it in. We have a 100K stretch goal that's coming up that I'm really excited about, which is just more zombies. And basically, we've been taking offers and taking requests on what kind of zombies you want to see, but we're going to double the number of zombies and stat blocks. This is one that was requested by one of our fans, which is a zombie floater. You got to have a good zombie floater in there. And then the zombie cops. So as you guys know, with Return of the Living Dead, you still keep your faculties. So this guy still thinks he's a cop, but he's a zombie. So that's going to be fun. And then this is a little bit of a secret, guys. The cyber zombie. Yes, there might be an option to be able to meet this guy somewhere in the Return of the Living Dead universe. The zombie. So a lot of people are like, ooh, where did that guy come from? Well, I can't tell you quite yet. But what I will tell you is he will be properly statted out in the game. And I think you guys are gonna have a lot of fun once you figure out what's going on with this particular gentleman right here. So let's go ahead and walk through a couple of our stretch goals beyond that, because it's going to tie into this introduction I'm about to make. We're already past our 90K stretch goal, which is providing digital artwork for a lot of fun things that you can do. The extra zombies is next, which is what you just saw. We got a couple of them. Someone suggested a zombie clown. We're working on it. We have a plushy half dog that we've actually built out that I'm super excited about. You guys know about the hot dog. You remember the movie. And then we have, for some strange reason, at $120,000, the actual goal that I would like to achieve is a mystery writer, a mystery adventure writer that we want to celebrate bringing on, to be able to bring on their own adventure if we hit that number. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that writer, that particular person is none other than Keith RA DeCandido. Keith, good to
Hello.
see you, my friend.
Good to see you. And I hate doing this while we're live.
DeCandido.
That's DeCandido.
Candido.
Yes, everybody
Keith
gets it wrong. It's
RA
fine.
DeCandido.
Yes, that's it.
Excellent. Well,
yes,
I understand that you're calling from the Tales of Origins, like from the tail end of Origins.
Yes, I had a very successful Origins. I was in the author's alcove along with a whole mess of other authors. We did some really good panels. We sold lots of books. We had a wonderful time. And I'm pausing on the journey home in order to do this little interview here.
Thank you very much for doing that.
No problem. Happy to do it. I'm very excited about this project.
So, when we approached you about potentially being a celebrity author on here, you sort of jumped at the chance, which is great. Tell us a little bit about, and I'm assuming that sort of horror is one of the genres that you enjoy writing about.
Oh yeah. One of several, but yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. You're a celebrated journalist or celebrated author, period. But tell us a little about your affinity with horror.
I've always enjoyed horror. It was one of those things where I didn't realize I was a horror writer for a long time, but I've been doing a lot of it, and it just, it keeps it's fun to explore those, the things that are scary, and how people deal with them. In terms of what I've done, I've done a lot of media tie-in fiction. That's a lot of what I'm best known for. So I've worked in a lot of horror with a lot of horror properties, including Resident Evil, the TV show Supernatural, the movie Night of the Living Dead, which is one near and dear to this particular project's heart, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and some others, Alien for that matter, which is both science fiction and horror, and I've also written some stories for a bunch of different horror uh, venues, including more recently. I've done some stuff for Weird Tales.
Oh yeah.
Both a magazine and an anthology that is coming out, that came out a couple of years ago. Weird Tales, as I'm sure most of the people watching this know, has been around since 1923, and it's where H.P. Lovecraft wrote all his Cthulhu stories, and lots of other great horror came out of that magazine. And in 2023, they put out an anthology called 100 Years of Weird, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to contribute to that. And I wrote a story that I'm really proud of. That it's called Prezzo, which is the Italian word for the gift, and it was about Italian immigrants in 1930s New York and also monsters. And it was fun to do that particular time period, to dig into that. I like writing in different eras, and also with just the kind of really nastiness that that you can get out of the horror genre, and also the nastiness of what it was like living as an immigrant in 1930s New York, which was not always very pleasant. And so that was juxtaposing both the evils of human beings with the evils of monsters you summon from hell.
I really feel like TV shows like HBO's Lovecraft Country did a nice job with that, where it mixed sort of the Lovecraftian horror with sort of the issues of its time, and so that's the kind of thing that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
That's great, and I think we need more immigrant stories for sure.
And it was fun to and working in the Resident Evil franchise was great. I novelized the first 3 Resident Evil films, and I also did a graphic novel which came out last year, which was a prequel to the Infinite Darkness animated series. So it focused on the character of Leon Kennedy stopping a terrorist attack in Pittsburgh, because that was in the first episode. It said that they flew Leon into the White House. He just stopped a terrorist attack in Pittsburgh, and so I jumped at that chance because I have family in Pittsburgh.
So you know the terrain.
Oh yeah. So that was a lot of fun. Is actually working in some genuine landmarks, and when I wrote the script, I embedded so much photo reference into the script, so the artist, because I wanted to make sure this looked recognizably like Pittsburgh. I didn't want to just do generic Midwestern city. So I made sure that to give the artist as much reference as I could, and it came out great. I was really happy with it.
So I gotta say, like you really are like the king of movie tie-ins. We've been talking a little bit about your horror line, but Star Trek and Farscape, and I mean, really, where I know you from is your science fiction work.
Right. I've done science fiction, fantasy, horror, mystery. I've written a couple of Sherlock Holmes stories, which has been fun to do. I've done a lot of Star Trek. Probably that's of the 30 odd licenses I've worked in, Star Trek is probably the one I've done by far the most in. Well over a dozen novels, also well over a dozen novellas, and a whole lot of short stories, and a few comic books as well, plus a coffee table book. I've done some RPG work for Star Trek Adventures, and I've also written about Star Trek for a lot of different sources, including Entertainment Weekly, the official Star Trek magazine, and mostly for Reactor Magazine, which used to be called Tor.com and recently rebranded. I've been writing about Star Trek for them since 2011. I've done rewatches of the classic shows, and I've been reviewing the new shows as they debut on Paramount Plus as well.
So Keith, I've got to ask this: did Star Trek find you, or did you find Star Trek?
Both. It's mostly my parents' fault. My parents watched Star Trek in its original run in the late '60s.
Yeah, yeah, my
They
dad
were,
too.
yeah, they were in college at the time, and I grew up watching the reruns. So that was like I grew up in New York City, and one of the independent stations here, Channel 11, excuse me, ran uh, reruns of the original series at 6 o'clock every weeknight.
Mm.
So that was our routine. Everybody would, I'd come home from school, my parents would come home from work, we would watch Star Trek at 6, and then we'd eat dinner at 7. That was that was how we did things.
Yeah, all
So
right.
and that was how we grew up.
So you grew up watching Star Trek, as did I,
Yes.
and then when did you realize you wanted to be a novelist?
It was never not there. That was always a desire for me. My parents are librarians, and they read to
Oh,
me when I was a kid, and they always uh, they always wanted to uh, give me a chance to tell stories and such, and hear read. They read to me a lot, um, and uh, and then I started reading on my own as well.
yeah.
But they always encouraged me, and I always wanted to be one of the people who told stories. I always wanted to also tell stories, and so I don't remember a time when I didn't want to do that. The first book I ever wrote was when I was 6 years old. It was called Reflections in My Mirror. It's a little thing I did on construction paper. It's terrible. I was 6, but um, but it was I that and I did a bunch of other, like I did a silly comic book about a superhero called Super Two,
Love
which
it.
was horrible, you know. But I love to make stories. I always did, and I kept doing it until eventually they started paying me for it. So
And so did you go to school? Did you go to college for this, or were you like, I'm just going to start writing and submitting, and that's how I'm just going to do it?
I did. Uh, I focused on English literature in college.
Okay.
That was I was an English major with a focus on 19th century literature mostly. That was just what interested me the most. Um, and So I did that, and I also worked for the newspaper, one of the newspapers on campus. I
Okay.
went to Fordham University, and we had two newspapers at Fordham. We had the Ram, which was sort of the stodgy official paper, and then we had the paper, lowercase t, lowercase p, the paper. And they were much more interesting and freewheeling and fun. And so, of course, I went there. I wrote for them first year. And then the sophomore and junior year, I was the arts editor. And then I was executive editor senior year.
Okay.
And that was great for a number of reasons. For one thing, it gave me a career path that I could follow until such a time as the writing took off. Um, so I I got it. After working on the paper, I was able to parlay that into a job as an editor, first for Library Journal magazine, and then later for the book packager Byron Price, and that enabled me to make a living until I could unless and until I could make the writing work. And after 8 years, I finally did. Um, but I loved I focused on English literature partly because I figured it would make me a better writer. So that's why I did that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have a question. We got a question from the audience. They want to know, from TOS to Enterprise, which series did you like writing for the most?
The one I enjoyed most as a viewer was Deep Space Nine.
By the way, hands down the best Star Trek. I mean, season 2 and beyond. Season 1 was a little iffy. I can't agree with you more.
I love DS9, and part of why I love DS9 is that it built on what the original series and the Next Generation started. I mean, a lot of what was good about it was taking stuff that had been already established on the two prior shows and building on it and expanding it and such. And that was part of the appeal to me. And just in general, I mean, I at least appreciate all of the Star Trek shows. I like some better than others, but what I particularly love is that universe. I love that setting, the fact that it's an optimistic future. I mean, it's Star Trek is very much aspirational fiction. It is not realistic fiction.
Right.
If I want realistic science fiction, I'll watch The Expanse, or I'll watch Babylon 5, or I'll watch Stargate, which all three of which I love. But
Babylon 5 is realistic. That's interesting.
Oh yeah. The honestly, I'm rewatching Babylon 5 right now for Reactor magazine, and a lot of the stuff that was going on there is proven to be remarkably prescient in terms of things like propaganda and other political things. Babylon 5 is a much more cynical view of humanity than Star Trek does, but that's the point. Babylon 5 is a more likely future than Star Trek, but I like Star Trek's future better, obviously. But I like the fact that it's not about who can shoot fastest or who is the strongest or who can trick the other person. It's about compassion and it's about conversation. The best Star Trek episodes are ones where the problem is solved by people talking to each other or by people coming to an understanding with each other. Whether it's, the Corbomite maneuver back on the original series where, an act of compassion is what leads to the successful first contact, to the Dominion War, which didn't end because of one side being more militarily superior, but because Odo made a sacrifice and went back to his people and brought the cure for the plague to them. On Discovery, the burn was solved because they basically showed compassion to a 100-year-old child. And so that ethos is what I love about Star Trek, is that it's always about conversation and about compassion and about being nice to each other and about humanity trying to be its best rather than its worst. And DS9 did that too. I mean, DS9 challenged the Star Trek utopia a lot.
Yeah.
But it never ran away from it. And it viewed it as something that you needed to struggle to maintain sometimes and that you had to fight for, but it was still something that was very much a part of it. And I think it reinforced it, because it wasn't something that those characters could take for granted necessarily. So.
Yeah, I thought what was really interesting about it was like when you take a look at sort of the next generation, the next generation, it was very much about sort of this whole sort of path of reason, right? You have the Beta Z and stuff like that. And I think really DS9 was really a really good transition to sort of where we are now with the Star Trek universe, where it had introduced conflict when there was none. And really forced some of these hard conversations to happen. And I think now, if you take a look at the stuff like the Picard show and a couple other ones that are out there now, there's way more conflict in those shows than there were back in the day.
Part of that was Roddenberry himself, because later in life he started to believe his own nonsense and took a much more hardline view of that aspirational future. And insisted that there be no conflict on Next Generation, which I think Next Generation suffered for and was at its best when it ignored that system. But the producers of Next Gen felt obligated to stick with that, and it still worked. But the other shows didn't so much, and it worked to their benefit. Like I said, the utopia means more if it's something that is occasionally challenged and that you have to fight for.
Sounds incredibly appropriate where we are these days and times.
Oh yeah.
So that's great. I mean, obviously you have a huge love for Star Trek, and tell me a little bit about one of the novelizations that you struggled with the most, if you're comfortable doing so.
One I struggled with was actually was a game tie-in that I did back in 2007 for Command and Conquer.
Okay, sure.
And the challenge there was a combination of not enough time to write the book, and the fact that it was in development while I was working. I spent the novel, both the novel and the game came out in 2007. In the fall of 2006, I spent a day at EA's offices in Los Angeles and just, wandered around. They showed me all the stuff they were doing. We talked about different, story ideas and such. But it was still in process. And as a result, there was an entire B plot I had to rewrite from the ground up because they changed something in the game. and which I had no way of knowing, and then at the time that I first pitched it to them, it worked, but it didn't. So I had to rewrite everything in that B plot, and because it had to be out in time for the game, so it was horribly rushed. What was especially frustrating about that was that the game itself did not do well. um, and what was especially annoying, the two main characters in my novel were younger versions of characters who were going to be in the next game they were going to do after that, which they never did because the first game's
Well, it's interesting. We run into
it was
a lot.
nobody's fault. It was it was the time constraint. That's how licensed fiction works, and you don't know what's going to succeed. You don't know what's going to sell well. My friends and colleagues, Peter David, Bob Greenberger, and Michael Jan Friedman, did a bunch of stuff for the Will Smith movie After Earth. They did a novelization, and there was going to be all this other stuff. They were going to do this whole world of stuff that they built out, and then the movie tanked, so none of it came to pass. And you don't know until it comes out whether anybody's actually going to go for it or not. So
yeah, it's interesting because we face the same thing. We work with licensed properties, and sometimes licensed properties are okay with the direction, and then they're no longer okay with the direction. Sometimes and it's worse when it's in development, right? So if it's an 80-year, it's a 20-year-old, 30-year-old property like Highlander, it's pretty baked. But if it's something more recent, like we did the Kong Skull Island, where Kong is constantly evolving. There's TV shows that are being produced all regularly. It was a little more challenging. So definitely can appreciate where you're coming from there.
I did an Alien novel. It was a novelization of the Alien Isolation game, and I was scared to death because the Disney bought 20th Century Fox, and I was worried that they were going to come in when a new company coming in, so they may decide to change everything. They didn't. It all worked out okay, but I was worried that they were going to kick it out from under me because new corporate masters, and they have their own idea of what to do. Sure. But it didn't. They kept continuity. The same people, the same licensing people were left in charge, at least initially, and so the book went through fine without any problem.
Yeah. So this is fun. I've never seen this before. We just got an alert for talking about some sort of community guidelines.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if we can. I don't know if we can. Maybe we can't talk about some of these licenses that we're talking about. I don't know. That's very Big Brother.
Okay.
But here's what I could say though. I love your books, and the ones that I've read were fantastic. Tell us about your ideation process, right? I mean, you get a license. The license says one thing or another. It gives you some guidelines, and then you take those. Yeah, sometimes, right? And then now you got to form.
It depends. There are properties I've worked with that are very heavily micromanaged. To give another gaming example, my World of Warcraft novel, that universe, they manage every single nanosecond of what happens in World of Warcraft. I have done others where they don't care what I do. It's like, yeah, fine, whatever, sounds good. Like at some TV shows I've done tie-ins for where they're completely flexible with what we do, and everything in between those. But usually what happens is, and this is true with my own original stuff too. I will come up with a story first, a plot outline. If it's a licensed property, then I have to get that approved by the people who own it. So CBS Paramount for Star Trek, it would be the 20th Century Fox, and now Disney for Alien. Marvel or Warner Brothers for Supernatural, or Blizzard Games for Warcraft and Starcraft, or so on. Somebody from there has to approve it. And then you write the story. Yeah. A lot of licenses I've worked with have been very cooperative. Some of them haven't. Some of them have very specific ideas of what they want, so they'll say no. And this is why you write the outline first. You come up with the outline, and they say, yeah, this is fine, this is not fine, don't do that part, get rid of that character, whatever, and you try to solve all those problems at the outline stage so that when you actually write the book, there's less issues. And most of the time that works. Every once in a while, something will change. But so yeah.
Yeah, so so I know that your wife's with you in the Panera there, but does she participate in the ideation process? Is she your sounding
Sometimes,
board?
there are many times when we have taken long drives, like the drive we're doing here from Ohio back to New York, where we'll bat ideas around. More with my original stuff than with the tie-in fiction, but even with some of the tie-in stuff, she's really good at kibitzing,
That's
um,
great.
and she's good to bounce ideas off of, and she's given me some wonderful thoughts about what to do in certain novels, and sometimes not everything, but my wife is also a professional editor, and she will sometimes edit, do a pass on my work. Again, more on my original stuff than on my tie-in stuff. The tie-in stuff usually has pretty heavy oversight anyhow, and she doesn't have time to read everything I write anyhow. But she's she's got her earbuds in, so she doesn't even know that I'm talking about her right now.
No, I'm pretty sure her ears are burning nonetheless. All right, so and you're a longtime gamer, right? So did you start with the big D&D, or how did you get into gaming?
It was D&D in high school. That was first year of high school. My best friend said, "Hey, I've got this game. You should try it." Um, we throughout high school, I played Dungeons and Dragons. I played the Marvel Comics role playing game that was out in the 1980s.
Yeah, Jeff Grubb wrote that. One of our
Yeah.
One of our friends.
And FASA's Star Trek and Doctor Who role playing games, both. I did all of those through high school, into college, and into my 20s. I haven't done much gaming recently, just on time.
Yeah.
I'm too busy writing. When I got the contract to do the World of Warcraft novel, people asked me, "Do you play World of Warcraft?" I said, "No, because I've seen what it does to people." I barely have time to spend. I barely have any leisure time as it is. This would swallow it all up.
By the way, I was one of those guys who took a year off of work and did World of Warcraft full time. It was a lot of fun.
But I loved role playing games, and several. One of my original series is started with a novel called Dragon Precinct, which is a mix of epic fantasy and police procedure. I pitch it as kind of Law and Order meets Lord of the Rings, and the two main characters are based on RPG characters that I played.
Nice.
One was a ranger in a Dragonlance campaign that I did in college, and the other was actually used in a fantasy role-playing game that a friend of mine developed and was eventually released as the Wildside gaming system, basically because he looked at D&D and decided and thought that a lot of the rules were stupid and he could do better. So so he created his own thing, and the other detective, Jennifer Sicilian, was one of the characters that I played in that game, who I really like. And the other one was Torin Ben Wibble, who's the ranger. And both of them were just characters I loved and wanted to do something with. And I actually, I started like 5 or 6 different novels with the two of them as the heroes that were mostly terrible until I finally hit on the idea of them being cops. And then it works perfectly. They make wonderful detectives. And I've done 6 novels with the 7th coming. A short story collection with 2 more short story collections coming, and it's been a very fruitful series for me. So.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. Let's see here. Another warning here. 2 of my friends lost their jobs to WoW, and only one of them played.
Oh God.
Yes, it was addictive. It was very addictive.
Oh God. This was in 2006. I mean, so this was right when WoW was really at the height of its popularity. Like the approval of my outline was delayed by 2 weeks because they were too busy installing 6 new servers to handle the load of all the people playing the game.
Yeah, that's a good problem to have, I suppose. I have a quick question with regards to sort of the industry in general, right? So you write novels. Mm-hmm. Everything is going so digital so quickly. Where do you think the future of novelization is going?
I don't know. I have been reading articles about how publishing is dying for the entire 35 years I've been in the publishing industry, and they've always been wrong. Um, Publishing has changed significantly over those 35 years. But basically, people still read books. The form they read the books in has changed. Um, Ebooks have become a thing. Audiobooks have become a thing, much more so than they were when I started. Well, ebooks didn't exist in 1990. The technology wasn't there for it. Audiobooks have taken off simply because you're not limited by cassette tapes. Um, so, and the means by which one can listen to them are much greater now. And that's just expanded the number of ways people can read. Ebooks are particularly useful because you can change the type size, you can adjust it as needs be. You don't have to worry about storing it because it takes up this amount of space
Yeah.
for your entire library, and so that's just made it, and the rise of the small press and medium press and the ability of people to self-publish has just increased the number of stories that are out there. All of which, these are all good things. It's similar to what's happened with television. It used to be if you didn't get your TV show on one of the three networks, then you didn't have a TV show. Now there's so many different options. Your show can be on Netflix, your show can be on HBO, your show can be on TNT, and there's so many, your show can be on YouTube, and there's so many ways to do it and it just increases the number of stories that are out there, which is great. It gives more people more opportunities to find their audience. So,
it's interesting because when I first went to college, I was really a big fan of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I discovered, Harlan Ellison and all the Ray Bradbury and all those really amazing writers. And so like I shift between those and novellas and large books. And do you see any sort of shifts that way? Are the trends moving one way or the other?
I mean, short stories are still being published. One thing that crowdfunding has been good for is it's been a boon to anthologies because publishers aren't necessarily going to take a chance on an anthology because they don't always sell well. But if you crowdfund it, a lot of anthologies have been surviving crowdfund because you've got everybody contributing to the anthology promoting it. So it can reach its audience that way. And short fiction is being published in all sorts of different ways now. Some people are just releasing stories on their own. There's still plenty of magazines out there. A lot of them are electronic only or mostly electronic at this point. I mentioned Weird Tales magazine before. I was actually surprised to learn Weird Tales actually the best. It has three different versions. There's the electronic version, obviously. There's the actual physical magazine, and there's the audio. They do an audio version of each issue. In fact, the next issue that's coming out in July has a story by me in it, and I also did my own audio for it, which was cool.
Nice.
And the one of those three that sells the best is the audio. That's the one that people are most interested in.
Speaking of which, comment from the gallery here, which is an 8-hour shift goes by really fast with an audio. He's 100% right.
Yeah. The more ready availability of audiobooks is one of the biggest changes over the industry over the 35 years I've been in it, and again, it's for the better. It's another way people who have trouble focusing on print, or people who are dyslexic, or people who commute, or specifically commute in a car. You can't read and drive at the same time, but you can listen to a book and drive at the same time. So that, or if you have one of those jobs where you're sitting at a desk, where you have to keep an eye on something, but don't need to be paying perfect attention the whole time, you've got something you can listen to, and that's just more ways to consume the literature, which is again good for everybody.
Yeah, I had an hour-long work commute, and I got through the whole Drizzt Do'Urden series over that year.
Yeah.
It's the best, really. I mean, if you're not, I'm not a huge music guy, and I love stories, so it was really perfect for me. All right, so listen, you're kind enough to be able to think through doing this stretch goal for us. By the way, 120K stretch goal. Come on, let's do it. We had a lot of fun because we were talking a little bit about the idea of where did you want to put it within the world, right? And so, as with most IP, there's something called a world Bible. Well, good IPs, and the world Bible will typically outline what's going on and how the world functions and things along those lines. And I was mentioning to you that the concept of the trioxin zombie, the IP holder has created a world Bible across 5 decades. So what did it look like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s? And I'm sure he's got something all the way up to current time or even future. And so, we wanted to figure out where you wanted to put your story. So would you mind telling us what decade did you want to tell your story, Keith?
I immediately said I wanted to do the 70s, which I didn't even think would be an option going in, because I was thinking, Night of the Living, Return of the Living Dead rather came out in '84, so that's like, but it also ties back to the events of Night of the Living Dead,
Right.
As interpreted later by George Romero, but that left the 70s. The 70s were also an option. One of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer novels I wrote was called Blackout, and that actually took place almost entirely in New York in 1977, focusing on the Slayer Nikki Wood, who was the Slayer that Spike killed on the subway, for those of you who watched the show. And I've done a bunch of other things in the 70s. I love that. I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 1969. I grew up in New York in the 70s. That was my childhood. A lot of some of my favorite things came out of that: TV shows, movies, music. That was the rise of that was the big rise of the kung fu craze, with Bruce Lee popularity, blaxploitation films, all sorts of stuff, and some really nifty music, and all of that is stuff I love doing that, and I loved writing Blackout, and I did a story for a shared world anthology called Limbus Inc. that Journal Stone published, which also mostly took place in the 70s. I'm currently working with a publisher on doing a superhero novel series that's going to take place in New York in the 70s also. And so my first thought was, let's do that. In particular, New York City in the 70s was a very tumultuous time and place. And again, one that I grew up in. So I thought that would be a fun thing to use as the setting, because zombies would fit right in in that particular era in the Big Apple's history. That was the era of riots, of police going on strike, the Son of Sam killings, the famous headline "Ford to New York, drop dead," when because the city was broke, and they asked for federal aid, and President Ford refused. There was blizzard and tempestuous mayoral election. There was a blackout in July of '77. Just all sorts of stuff, and I think that's a great backdrop for the zombies of Return of the Living Dead.
So I have to ask. So exact same time period as the Buffy the Vampire Slayer novelization.
Yeah.
Could the characters might run into a vampire slayer of some sorts?
I mean, I really don't want to get sued. I don't want you to get sued, but there might. Although in that Buffy book, I put a few references that were sly references to other pop culture at the time. So we'll see what happens.
There you go. All right. So it's going to be called Blackout of '77. It's going to take place in 1977 during the real blackout. What are the characters going to be faced up against? I mean, obviously, it was interesting because I was on an interview on Friday, and someone was interviewing me about this game. They said, "Tell us about the zombie apocalypse." And I go, No. Return of the Living Dead is not a zombie apocalypse. It's a zombie outbreak. Because all the stuff, all the situations that are going on within the Return of the Living Dead universe never end in the planet, right? They never end the civilization as we know it. They typically are in one very focused area, and then they're ultimately contained.
Right.
So tell us a little bit more about what you potentially envision about this zombie outbreak.
Mostly just the '77 blackout. Unlike the blackout, there have been 3 major blackouts in New York City. One was in 1965, one was in '77, one was in 2003. The ones in '65 and 2003 were very calm. People, dealt with it and stayed in their homes and generally were well behaved. In 1977, not so much. There was rioting, there was looting, there was pure chaos. I was 8 years old at the time, and I and my family were in Central Park. We were watching a play. Um, it was a production of the Three Penny Opera at the Delacorte Theater, which is an outdoor theater in Central Park. It's still there, and it happened in the middle of a song too. and the show must go on. The woman finished the song that she was singing, and then they came out and said that the lights are out and go home. But
and this was all throughout Manhattan, the entire island,
the whole city, all 5 boroughs,
wow.
and some of the outlying areas too. The whole city went dark, and it happened at like 7 in the evening too. So in the middle of a really hot summer, and suddenly nobody's fans or air conditioning worked. And this was in '77. Most cars didn't have air conditioning either, and it was horrible. And there was, like I said, there was rioting, there was looting, it was an absolute chaos. And the idea of this module would be that there would also be some of the trioxin zombies would get loose, and they people, half of the city probably wouldn't even notice them because of everything else that was going on. But they would fit right in with the absolute craziness that was going on in the city at the time.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. Now,
Yeah.
do you remember seeing The Return of the Living Dead when it first came out? Or did you see it after?
I'm sure I must have. I mean, I've watched it a couple of times since then. I must have seen it at the time. I was in high school when it came out.
Yeah.
And I don't have a specific memory of going to see it.
Yeah.
But that was also a very long time ago. So, and I'm old. But but it was a good. I rewatching it, after we started talking, I wanted to sit down and rewind it. A lot of stuff came back to me that I remembered, like send more paramedics. and just I mean that movie, as much as Night of the Living Dead, really kind of set the tone for what people think of as zombies now. And it was really it was such a seminal work. And just so gleefully ridiculous in all the best possible ways. It's a fun movie. Where Night of the Living Dead was creepy and scary. Return of the Living Dead was just a romp, and pure gleeful chaos with more or less the same plot. But that was part of the fun. Was that that it was just completely ridiculous, and also that the whole thing started just because of 2 guys who were not that bright.
Well, not only that, but it started. I rewatched it myself, and it started because the United States government wanted to create a weed killer for marijuana.
Right.
It just starts off hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, yeah. Oh, sorry, I wanted to show this stream instead. Yeah, and then Trash, of course, was iconic.
Yes.
In her performance.
Indeed.
And interestingly enough, so we were talking to our artist Graham Humphreys, who actually did the very first poster for the film, Night of the Living Dead. And he talked about how VHS, this whole period of horror was enhanced by the fact that you could watch them on VHS tapes. And Return of the Living Dead was actually outsold the VHSs more than it actually even sold in the movie theater. And wow. So if it wasn't for that phenomenon of the VHS, and I'm sure there's something tied between that and horror, horror and VHS, where it just really exploded the genre and then made this movie what it was.
A bunch of movies like that. Some just don't find their audience until, jumping back to Star Trek for a second. Star Trek was never that popular when it was on NBC originally, but it was in reruns that it really took off. And The Princess Bride's another one. That was a flop in theaters, and now it's like one of the big cult hits of all time.
And of course, one of the most famous stories of that is Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, where Roger Ebert 2 decades later apologized for painting that film after it gained a tremendous amount of popularity on DVD and Blu-ray. So
Yeah.
yeah, and so you know, obviously, you know, the trioxin zombies were different for a lot of different reasons. One is there's the very first time a zombie ever craved brains,
Right.
And also it was the very first version of a fast zombie.
Yes.
You know, I'm watching the Last of Us, and I was like, oh, those are fast zombies. Yes, they are.
Yes. Very fast zombies. Yeah.
And then of course, you know, they didn't. But the differences are they didn't transmit it with a bite. It was all done through the gas.
Mm-hmm.
So, given some of these interesting sort of differences, you know, stuff that's not very Walking Dead or not very Night of the Living Dead, even how do you think you're gonna play around with some of those fun items in
I
the
mean,
new?
the fun part of it is you know how the different characters interact with them and how they respond to it.
Yeah.
You know, these are zombies are like you know like a natural disaster in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You know, it's also what's appealing about you know like the Borg on Star Trek or Galactus in the Marvel universe. You know, it's the force of nature as much as it is an actual villain. What's fun about these guys is that they are self aware, um, and they know exactly what they are and what they need to do, which makes it even more of a it ups the horror in some ways because you're actually you know talking to this you know disembodied head that wants to chow down on your cranial matter, which really amps up you know and in general with zombie fiction you've got um, the aspect of that your friends could turn into zombies who you then have to fight,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, which is something you also get in vampire fiction and you know a lot of other horrors where somebody who used to be a friend becomes an enemy, and that can be very compelling from a storytelling perspective. So,
Speaking of which, I don't know if you saw Sinners, but that was a really central spot in Sinners as the
I have
two
not seen
friends.
that yet, but
Oh yeah, I won't spoil it, but you know that whole sort of observing your own humanity,
yeah, yeah,
which is a really central part of horror, and I think they did it really well in that film.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that'll be a lot of fun as you put that story together, and um, you know, so now we've got the time, the decade. Now we have the place and time. Now we have the zombies. Tell us a little about what your writing process will be like as you start to
Um,
put this thing together.
but yeah, just figuring out how what the best way to set the story is. I actually need to do a little bit of research into the time period because there's a couple of locations I'm thinking might work,
Okay.
um, and I'm not sure which one yet. There's a couple of possibilities, including some areas of the city that were all but abandoned in the 70s, including the old warehouse district,
Mm.
which these days is all like completely built up. It's all like you
It's all
know
the cool
new
clubs
construction and
now.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fancy high rises. It's you know what the warehouse used to be in what's now Hudson Yards, which is over by on the far west side. Uh, and most of that is now you know uh, like I said, fancy high rises. But in the 70s, it was mostly abandoned warehouses because people couldn't afford to pay the rent on them, so they were just sort of sitting there.
Mm.
And that's one possibility of where it can be. And there's other things as well. You know, you've got the South Bronx, you've got um, uh, other parts of the outer boroughs, you got Central Park. Um, there's all sorts of different possibilities of where the zombies could wind up, and I just got to figure out what will work best for the game.
Yeah. Now I got to ask. So we've been talking a lot about your extremely rich history as a novelist. Have you written an RPG adventure before?
I've done two. I did one for the Firefly role playing game, which came out in 2014,
Yes.
which was a heist story, where the crew of Serenity has to steal something, and uh, and I've done one for Star. I mentioned Star Trek Adventures. I did some writing for the Klingon Empire core source book, and then Fred Love and I collaborated on a Klingon adventure called Incident at Krav 3, which was a story focusing on a Klingon ship that has to find out why a power plant has gone dark. And it's set up to take place shortly after Star Trek 6. So it's after the Klingons lost Praxis. It blew up. And so they're in a period where they're cooperating with the Federation, but they don't want to like cooperate completely with the Federation. And one of the places
blackout story, Keith, is this another blackout story? I feel like you.
No. This is what it is one of the small power plants that used to be minor. Suddenly, like with Praxis being destroyed, it suddenly was more important because now they needed to provide more than they used to because of the loss of their main thing on that moon. So and then they go quiet. So the players are serving on a Klingon ship. They have to go and investigate and find out why they've lost contact with them. So
that's amazing. We got a question here. Are you an outline writer or a free flow writer?
I am very much an outline writer. Part of that comes out of starting out as a media tie-in writer, where you have to be an outline writer. You have to write the outline before they will approve it. So you don't write a word of your story until the people who own the IP approve that outline, and that's how I've continued to write. Sorry, my earbud fell out. That's how I've continued to write since, and I'm much more comfortable that way. I like knowing what my driving directions are before I start down the road, as it were. And it's the same sort of thing. So
yeah.
And I've only got a few more minutes before they're going to kick me out of here. So I can only take like one or two more questions.
All right. Well, we're almost at the end anyway. Yes. I really appreciate your time. Tell us a bit more about some of your future projects that we can look out for.
The big one is it's coming out in October 28th from the Weird Tales Presents imprint of Blackstone Publishing. It's called Supernatural Crimes Unit, NYPD. It is what I hope to be the first in a series about a division of the New York Police Department that handles crimes involving magic and monsters. They have to deal with things like a shape-changer who committed assault in Chelsea, a Tautee in Chinatown that has been stealing things, a Kappa on City Island in the Bronx who killed one of his roommates, and the big thing, which is a couple of corpses that have been liquefied by a very powerful spell. And they have to find out why those corpses were targeted and who the powerful magic user is who did it. And it turns out to be a part of a much larger plan that will endanger the city. So, like I said, I'm hoping it's the first of a series. It's an ensemble piece with a bunch of different detectives who are in charge of dealing with all the weird stuff. And they have their own little headquarters on 106th Street with special cells that have like pentagrams on the floor and iron bars and other such things to make sure that magical creatures can be held by them. And they have an archivist who's also an expert on the supernatural who they consult on things, and other fun stuff. So
I absolutely love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for us and Keith RA DeCandido. Candido. I'm going to get it right. I promise you.
You will. I have faith in you.
Thank you very much. I know that you chose to take this out of your day in a Panera in some place in Ohio. I just want to thank you very much for this. And again, $120,000, guys. $120,000 will unlock his amazing story called Blackout in 77. So let's go ahead and get back to the phone lines. And Keith,
all right,
you have a very, very safe trip home. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.